Hello everyone, I am back with my 1 month update video. Things have gone pretty well and I'm excited to talk about my progress so far. In this video, I'll start off by spending 3 or 4 minutes giving an overview of my studies and what level I'm at. After that, I'll go into more detail about what I did this past month, talk about the lessons that I learned, and end the video with a little bit of advice. But before we start, I want to mention something that I somehow forgot in the first video. I am learning the northern dialect of Vietnamese. My wife's family is from Hanoi, so that's what I'm learning. Okay, so first off, some statistics. Out of 31 days, there were 21 days where I studied for at least 3 hours. There were 6 days where I studied for at least 1 hour, 3 days where I studied for 30 minutes, and 1 day where I didn't study at all. In total, I spent about 71 hours learning Vietnamese this month. And considering that I was traveling for 7 days this month, I'm actually quite happy with those numbers. I did find that it was difficult to do flashcards or watch videos on vacation, except during travel times. Though that might get easier once I can understand things like audiobooks, things that I only listen to. But yeah, so breaking down those 71 hours, about 50 of them were spent watching YouTube videos. About 14 were spent on flashcards, and the other 7 hours were spent on other things. I'm actually thinking of upping my daily study time from 3 to 4 hours relatively soon, but I'm going to stick with 3 hours for just a little bit longer. So regarding my current level, I can understand bits and pieces of what I hear in videos, only single words or 2-word phrases. Most everything is still incomprehensible to me. However, the language sounds so much more familiar to me than before I started. Things sound less like gibberish and more like words I just don't understand yet. Because of that, I'm able to pick up new words just from watching videos, so long as it's obvious what they're talking about and they say the word clearly. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to figure out the spelling of what I hear, but usually I can figure it out. The words I do know, I can hear more effortlessly as time goes on. It's like they're real vocabulary words, or real words in my vocabulary, but they're scattered among tons of other words in grammar that I just don't know yet. There are a few words that I can recall from memory, as opposed to just hearing them and recognizing what they are. I think my pronunciation of them isn't terrible. I think it's way better than last month, but you be the judge. So to go somewhere on foot, die ball, duck, vi. To give, chaw, dog, chaw, 7, bai, and then to drink beer, uống bia. Yeah, so I don't know how great those actually are, but yeah, I feel like they're much better than they were last month. But again, this is for you to judge. So I can naturally recall these words, but I can't naturally put them into sentences. If I really think about it, I can construct a sentence in my head, but that's not what I want to be doing. I want the sentence to come out naturally, effortlessly. I expect that ability to come within a few months. I really don't know exactly when, so we'll see. I'll let you know in these videos. Also, by about day 10, I could tell whether something was the northern dialect or not. I actually was fairly surprised. I thought that was going to take much longer, but yeah, I can pretty reliably tell if something is northern dialect. Yeah, and as far as reading goes, I haven't done any at all. I haven't, I just opened this book before I started this video, and while I recognize a couple words, it's really not a big difference. I still can't. Yeah, I still can't really understand what's going on here, but I do see some words that I recognize. So yeah, let's now talk about what I did in more detail and what I learned along the way. So as I've mentioned, most of my time is split between watching YouTube videos and doing flashcards. So I'll start by talking about watching videos and how that process went. YouTube has been great for finding different things to watch. It's a little bit unfortunate in a way that the northern and southern dialect are so different, because there's some great northern content and there's some really interesting looking southern content, but I think it's really important to pick one dialect and stick with it until you reach some level of fluency. One problem I ran into in the beginning was that I couldn't tell which was which. I couldn't tell which videos were northern and which were southern, or which were northern and which weren't. And so I ended up just asking my wife. But as I said in the last video, I want to make this process repeatable. It's really important to me. So I have an idea to make this easy for other people in the future. So look forward to that fairly soon. So the next problem that I had was finding content that I enjoyed. Since as a beginner, I couldn't understand anything being said, the most interesting channels were the ones with lots of interesting visuals. I think there's some relation to children in this aspect, where they get enjoyment out of things in a different way because they don't entirely, or they don't fully understand what's going on. So yeah, I think it takes time and effort to discover something that you really enjoy. Around day 8, I still hadn't found anything that really captured my interest. And I found my mind like wandering a lot while watching videos. It was hard for me to focus. But around day 11, I found a channel called Hoa Ban Food. And yeah, I fell in love with that channel. Even today, most of my time is spent watching his videos, and I like genuinely look forward to watching them. So motivation is not really an issue for the time being. As far as how I felt watching this stuff during the first month, for the first few days, especially the first day, it felt like I wasn't learning much. It felt kind of like my time would be better spent with textbooks or doing something else. But I think true language acquisition, not just like memorizing a word, but truly acquiring words and language, it's a slow process. But it didn't take long before I noticed changes in what I was hearing, and how I was hearing things, and that helped my motivation. But despite that, I still found myself getting impatient from time to time, especially during the first maybe 20 days or so. Regarding like learning words while watching, I would often pause the video to try and look up a word that I just heard. Sometimes I would add this word to my flashcards, but most of the time I would just make a mental note of what it meant. I've actually been enjoying using this physical dictionary. I think it's nice to flip through the pages, and if you don't know how a word's spelled, you can kind of like look here, and you can look down the page or go to another page. I don't know. I just like flipping through this, so I do recommend this. And it's had pretty much everything that I've tried to look up. It didn't have MSG. I wanted to know what MSG was, but I couldn't find it in here. But yeah. One last thing about watching videos, and something that I think is actually really important, is that I wasn't just learning words by watching these videos. I have learned a ton about Vietnamese culture. And I believe I said this in the last video, but I think that language and culture are inseparable. And so even though it took me a while to start picking up the words from these videos, I was picking up loads of cultural information right from day one. So yeah, now I'll talk about what I am doing with flashcards. Some of you may already be familiar with programs such as Anki, Memrise, SuperMemo, Quizlet, there's a bunch. But let me take a few seconds just to make sure everyone is on the same page. When I say flashcards, I mean electronic flashcards, also commonly referred to as an SRS, or spaced repetition system. The term spaced repetition system comes from how the computer decides when you should see each card. It's like the spacing of when you see the cards. To put it simply, older cards that you're more familiar with are shown less often than newer ones that you don't know as well. This keeps the workload low, since you aren't reviewing like every card you've ever made like every single day. In addition, unlike traditional paper flashcards, I can put anything I want on the front or the back of these cards. So that includes text, images, audio, even video I can have on these cards. So back to how I am making them for Vietnamese. All of my cards consist of an audio clip on the front and the approximate English meaning on the back. The front is completely blank. This format I think is harder than cards with both audio and text, or just text. but I really believe it's far more effective in the long run. The audio clips are words, phrases, sentences that I have chosen to teach me common words, grammar patterns. More specifically, my wife has chosen and made everything because I don't understand the sentences and I can't record the audio myself. But here I will again reiterate that it is extremely important to me that this process be repeatable by others. So we plan on releasing these sentences and recordings once there's some semblance of completeness. So yeah, the flashcards in this audio only format I think are really helping me pay attention to slight differences in pronunciation. And to a beginner's ears, man, some of these differences are really slight. I have to listen to them a few times just to catch these minor differences that I think are really obvious to native speakers. I've also been using a minimal pair training app to practice from time to time. But I just started with that, and I'll talk about more about it in the future. But overall, I'm really happy with the audio format that I have for these cards: audio on the front and English approximation on the back. After I learn what's on a flashcard reasonably well, I plan to retire that card, maybe 2 or 3 months after I first learn it, because once I can understand this word in real spoken Vietnamese, exposing myself to Vietnamese fulfills the role of the SRS, because it exposes me to the word periodically, so I really shouldn't forget it. So far, only a percentage of the flashcards have truly matured into me being able to hear them in natural conversation, maybe half of the words. But hopefully some tweaks in how I've been choosing the words in the sentences, hopefully that'll improve that, how many I can really hear in real videos. I have to admit that doing these flashcard reviews was not always easy. I actually started by trying to learn entire sentences, many of which had several new words, and it was really mentally taxing. However, I started pre-learning the words and the sentences, and that's made things much smoother. I think that only learning only one thing at a time is really crucial. So whether that thing is one new word, a new combination of 2 words that a new grammar point, like a new way that the words are arranged, I think having only one new thing per card is really important. So at this point, at the 1 month mark, actually a couple days ago, but at the 1 month mark, I had 540 cards. I am currently spending about 30 to 40 minutes a day doing 150 to 200 reviews. But yeah, I do enjoy the reviews these days, now that I've made them easier. Again, only one new thing per card. So besides YouTube and flashcards, there are a few other things that I want to talk about. Regarding textbooks, the first few chapters of this grammar book were actually quite helpful. I have some stuff marked as I hit myself in the nose with the book. I have some stuff marked here, but it took me about 4 days to go through it. It explains the basics of Vietnamese and kind of how it works, which really gave me a framework from which to start. I think having that framework helped me hit the ground running when watching videos. It's not important that I use this particular book. I'm sure you can get equally good or better explanations elsewhere. This is just the one that I happen to use for now. On a similar subject, I think there are distinct limits to what you can learn from a book like this. And one of the biggest ones is with the tones. You can find all sorts of explanations and charts of what the tones should sound like, and that's probably helpful when you first get started, but ultimately how the tones are described on paper and how they sound in real speech turned out for me just to not be relatable. It's just not the same. They change so much in rapid speech and also in relation to the tone of the word that came before it. So I think the only way to truly learn the tones is just from lots of listening. On the bright side, even after just a month of listening, the tones have really started to take on a life of their own without me really doing anything to study them. I can just sometimes feel or just know that a word is different, that it's to know the tone of it. I do think that having single words on my flashcards helped me to differentiate these. So simple ones like I said earlier, to give, chaw and dog, chaw. I think just having those two words in my flashcards helped me kind of learn them, lay the groundwork. But also having full sentences in my flashcards has helped me realize just how much these tones depend on the word that comes before it. That was something I hadn't realized before. I still have a long way to go, but progress is coming really naturally and without any direct memorization or study of the patterns of the tones. I'm really happy with how the tones are going. Speaking. One note about that, I said in my last video that I wouldn't do any speaking, and I have stuck with that with one exception. I found myself wanting to repeat words or phrases that I had just heard, like just for fun. It kind of made me feel like a kid, just wanting to like mimic something that they just heard. I suspect this might be a beneficial process. I really don't know how to go about determining whether it is or not. Regardless, in my eyes, this is distinctly different from deliberately learning to speak. And I maintain that learning to listen before learning to speak is very important. I thought that was interesting, how much I wanted to just like repeat things. About my study schedule, I think committing to studying for like 3-hour periods has been good for my studies, though it does have some disadvantages, and of course it's not possible for everybody. But I think studying for a set period made it easy to keep track of how long I've actually been working, and I find it easier to stay on track since I committed to working on Vietnamese for that period of time. Having said that, I think I might split my study time into 2-hour blocks, 2-hour blocks, if I up my overall time to 4 hours a day. I think I'll retain the benefits I just mentioned, but gain a bit of flexibility in scheduling everything, because it's kind of hard to set aside a full 4-hour block. And that's about it for what's happened in the past month. And now, if you'll indulge me, there's a couple pieces of advice that I'd like to share that I hope will help some people in their language learning. So first, I'd like to talk about the difference between learning a language and learning about a language. So during the past month, I spent time learning things that were necessary to continue my journey in Vietnamese. For example, learning to type in Vietnamese, learning how to set up my computer to type in Vietnamese. And while these things are important and they're related to learning, they aren't learning. It feels like you spent a ton of time working on Vietnamese, working on learning Vietnamese, but it's an illusion. You haven't made any improvement during that time when you were learning about typing in Vietnamese, or learning about even books like this, learning about how Vietnamese works. You're not actually learning Vietnamese during that time, and I think it's easy to kind of repeat this day after day of learning things about the language or things related to the language, and a few weeks later wonder why you're not getting any better. I think it's a trap that every learner should kind of be aware of and watch out for. And second, I'd like to talk about perfection. I believe it's foolish. I don't know. I believe it's not in one's best interest to aim for perfection, or to believe that you have to use the perfect method to become fluent. I'd like to encourage anyone out there who wants to learn Vietnamese, or any language for that matter, to forget about finding the best materials, finding the best app, the best book, the best method. Just, forget about it. It's not important. The most important thing is to get started and then to put in the hours. If you put in the time, I believe the results will come. So yeah, that's it for my advice, and that's it for now. So thank you for watching, and I will check in again in a month.